At 5:29 a.m., the desert was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that feels like the world itself is holding its breath. A man stood alone behind a concrete bunker in the middle of New Mexico, his hands trembling, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He was not a soldier. He was not a politician. He was not even supposed to be there. He was a physicist who knew deep down that if the next few minutes went wrong, history would not exist to remember it. Some scientists had quietly calculated that this experiment might ignite the atmosphere, burning the entire Earth into fire. And yet, no one stopped it. At exactly 5:30 a.m., the desert turned into the sun. The story did not begin in the desert. It began years earlier, quietly, inside European universities, where men spoke in equations instead of prayers. In 1938, when German scientists split the atom for the first time, the news did not travel loudly. There were no headlines, no celebrations, only whispers, because those who understood it also understood what came next: energy beyond imagination, power beyond control. When Adolf Hitler's regime began pouring money into physics laboratories, a wave of fear swept across the scientific community. Jewish scientists fled Europe, not because they wanted to abandon their work, but because they wanted to survive. Many of them arrived in the United States with nothing but notebooks filled with dangerous ideas. America listened. In 1939, Albert Einstein, who hated war, signed a letter that would change history. The letter warned President Franklin D. Roosevelt that Nazi Germany might build an atomic bomb. Roosevelt read it carefully. Then he did something no democracy had ever done before. He approved the creation of the most secret project in human history. No press, no Congress debate, no public knowledge. Only a code name: the Manhattan Project. At first, the project barely existed, just paperwork and uncertainty. But after Pearl Harbor, everything changed. Time was no longer a luxury. If Germany built the bomb first, the war would end with fire. The U.S. government began recruiting the smartest minds alive: physicists, chemists, engineers. Many of them did not even know what they were signing up for. They were told only this: you will work on something vital to ending the war. They were not told it could end the world. High in the mountains of New Mexico, the U.S. Army erased a location from maps. Then it built a town there. Los Alamos had no name, no postal address. Families who moved there could not tell relatives where they lived. Letters were censored. Phone calls were monitored. Children grew up believing secrecy was normal. Scientists worked 6 days a week behind barbed wire, guarded by soldiers who didn't know what they were guarding. Even the janitors were watched. J. Robert Oppenheimer was chosen to lead the project. He was brilliant, charismatic, and emotionally fragile. He quoted Sanskrit poetry while designing weapons capable of killing cities. Some trusted him, some feared him. No one truly understood him. Inside Los Alamos, time blurred. Months passed without sunlight. Calculations filled thousands of pages. Arguments exploded over coffee cups. And beneath it all, a horrifying question remained unanswered. What happens when we actually test it? The question no one wanted to answer. By 1944, they knew the bomb would work. What they didn't know was whether the Earth would survive it. A young physicist quietly raised a concern. What if the nuclear reaction ignited the nitrogen in the atmosphere? What if the explosion never stopped? Calculations were rushed, assumptions were made. Uncertainty remained. Someone joked, "Well, it probably won't happen." And that was enough. July 15th, 1945. Rain fell over the desert. Some scientists drank whiskey. Some wrote letters they never sent. One reportedly placed bets on whether the bomb would ignite the atmosphere. Military officials prepared cameras because if the world ended, they wanted footage. No one slept. At 5:29 a.m., silence returned to the desert. At 5:30 a.m., humanity crossed a line it could never uncross. The light came first. Not heat, not sound. Light, so bright that it burned through closed eyelids and painted human bones in white shadows against concrete walls. For a fraction of a second, night turned into eternity. Then the shock wave arrived. The desert floor shook like a living thing, and men who had spent years calculating this moment fell silent, not in triumph, not in celebration, but in disbelief. They had succeeded, and in doing so, they had doomed the future to live with what they had created. Some scientists cheered. Some cried. One vomited behind the bunker. A few stood frozen, knowing instinctively that this was not victory, but a point of no return. J. Robert Oppenheimer did not speak. He remembered a line from an ancient text he had once studied in college, long before war had reshaped his mind. A line about death, a line about destruction, a line that would follow him for the rest of his life. Washington decides the unthinkable. The news reached Washington within hours. The test was a success. The weapon worked. The war in Europe was already over, but the war in the Pacific raged on. Every week, American soldiers were dying by the thousands. Military planners predicted that an invasion of Japan could cost up to 1 million lives, American and Japanese combined. The bomb offered a shortcut, a terrifying shortcut. In closed rooms, behind locked doors, men debated the fate of cities they had never seen. No Japanese civilians were present. No scientists from Los Alamos were asked for consent. This was no longer a scientific question. It was a political one. Some argued for a demonstration. Explode the bomb offshore, show its power, force surrender without bloodshed. Others dismissed the idea. What if the bomb failed? What if Japan still refused? They wanted certainty. They wanted shock. They wanted the war to end immediately. And so, quietly, a list was prepared. Cities that had been largely untouched by bombing. Cities whose destruction would be clearly visible. Cities that would send a message no one could misunderstand. The crew who did not know everything. On a Pacific Island airbase, a young bomber crew trained under intense secrecy. They were told they were carrying a special weapon. They were not told it was history's first atomic bomb. Pilots joked. Crew members complained about the weight. Someone painted a name on the side of the plane for luck. None of them imagined they were about to rewrite human morality. Hiroshima, 8:15 a.m. The city woke up like any other day. Streetcars ran. Children walked to school. Doctors prepared for morning rounds. There was no warning. At 8:15 a.m., the sky cracked open. In less than a second, tens of thousands of people were vaporized where they stood. Shadows of humans were burned permanently into walls. Skin melted. Buildings collapsed inward as if crushed by invisible hands. The explosion did not just kill, it erased. Those who survived the initial blast wandered the ruins in silence, their clothes burned away, skin hanging in strips, eyes blinded. They did not scream at first. They were too shocked. Black rain began to fall, thick, oily, radioactive. People drank it, desperate for relief from the heat, unaware it carried death inside every drop. The scientists heard the news. At Los Alamos, radios crackled with official announcements. The bomb had been dropped. The city had been destroyed. The war would soon end. Some scientists felt relief. Others felt horror. A few locked themselves in their rooms. They had built a weapon to stop fascism, yet now they wondered if they had become something else entirely. Oppenheimer sat alone that night, staring at nothing. He finally spoke the words aloud, not to reporters, not to politicians, to himself. Nagasaki and the silence after. 3 days later, another bomb fell. The world barely had time to process the first. This time, terrain spared part of the city, but death still arrived in waves. Families vanished, churches collapsed, hospitals became mass graves. Japan surrendered soon after. The war was over. The celebration in America was loud. The silence in Japan was endless. The heroes became a problem. At first, the scientists were hailed as heroes. Then the questions began. Could this weapon be controlled? Could it be uninvented? What happens when other nations build their own? Oppenheimer publicly opposed further nuclear expansion. That made him dangerous, not to enemies, but to his own government. Years later, his loyalty was questioned, his reputation dismantled, his access revoked. The man who helped win the war was slowly erased from power. The world that came after. The bomb did not end war. It changed it. Nations raced to build bigger, deadlier weapons. Children practiced nuclear drills in schools. The world learned to live under the shadow of instant annihilation. All because, once, in a desert at dawn, a group of men decided to see what would happen. And humanity has been living with the answer ever since. The war was over. Flags waved. Soldiers came home. Parades filled American streets with music and relief. Newspapers called it the greatest victory in human history. But in places far from the cameras, inside hospitals, laboratories, and classified files, the real story was only beginning. Because the bomb did not stop killing when the explosion ended. It simply learned to kill slowly. Radiation had no smell, no color, no sound. Doctors in Hiroshima and Nagasaki had never seen anything like it. People who appeared uninjured began losing their hair within days. Gums bled, skin darkened, fevers rose without infection. Children who survived the blast died weeks later for no visible reason. Autopsies revealed organs liquefying from the inside. The bomb had introduced a new kind of death, one that ignored distance, walls, and time. Within weeks, American teams landed in Japan. Officially, they came to help. Unofficially, they came to observe. They photographed burns, measured blood counts, tracked symptoms, documented deaths with scientific precision. But many survivors noticed something disturbing. The doctors asked questions. They took notes. They did not always treat. For some victims, pain relief was delayed or denied, so symptoms could be properly recorded. To the scientists, this was unprecedented data. To the victims, it felt like being bombed again, this time with indifference.
Back in the United States, classified reports piled up. They confirmed what officials refused to say publicly. Radiation sickness could last decades. Genetic damage might affect future generations. The true death toll was unknowable. Releasing this information would raise a terrifying question. Was using the bomb truly justified? So the reports were buried. Instead, the public was told a simpler story. The bomb ended the war and saved lives. And for many Americans, that was enough. The shadows did not stay in Japan. In the years that followed, the U.S. government conducted radiation experiments on its own citizens, often without consent. Hospital patients were injected with radioactive materials. Soldiers were exposed during nuclear tests. Entire towns were downwind from explosions conducted for research. Some subjects were poor, some were minorities, some were terminally ill and never told the truth. They were told it was treatment. It was data collection. Not everyone stayed silent. A few Manhattan Project scientists began warning the world. They spoke of arms races, of accidental launches, of extinction not by malice, but by mistake. Oppenheimer testified before Congress, his voice calm but haunted. He warned that nuclear weapons could not be controlled forever. The response was swift. He was labeled a security risk. His phone was tapped. His friends were questioned. His career dismantled piece by piece. The message was clear. Heroes were welcome until they questioned power. By the 1950s, the bomb had multiplied, then doubled, then grown hundreds of times stronger. Cities were mapped not for growth, but for destruction. Children practiced hiding under desks. Sirens were tested monthly. Films taught families how to survive nuclear blasts that, in reality, no one could survive. The world existed on borrowed seconds. All it would take was one error, one radar glitch, one misinterpreted signal. History nearly ended more than once. The hibakusha, the bomb survivors, were often shunned in Japan. People feared they were contagious. Employers refused to hire them. Marriages were canceled due to genetic fears. They lived longer than expected, but not easier. Their stories were inconvenient. They reminded the world that victory had a human cost no parade could erase. Today, the weapons still exist, thousands of them, waiting, built by nations that promise restraint until they don't. Every nuclear power traces its lineage back to that first sunrise in the New Mexico desert, the moment humanity learned it could destroy itself and chose to keep that power. No one announced it on television. No sirens warned the cities. It was a quiet night, the kind of night where boredom was more dangerous than fear. Inside a military radar station, green lines swept across black screens in steady rhythm. Operators sipped coffee, counting minutes until their shift ended. Then the screen changed. One dot appeared, then another, then hundreds. Missiles, incoming. The radar officer froze. According to the system, hundreds of nuclear warheads were flying toward the United States. Protocol was clear: retaliate immediately. If he followed the rules, within minutes, American missiles would launch. The Soviet Union would respond. Europe would vanish. Cities would burn. Civilization would end before sunrise. But something felt wrong. He looked again. The timing didn't make sense. The trajectories were too perfect. Against procedure, he delayed. Minutes passed. No explosions came. The attack vanished from the screen. Later analysis revealed the truth. The radar had mistaken sunlight reflecting off clouds for missiles. Humanity survived,
not because of technology, but because one man hesitated. No prayers were spoken publicly, but more than once after Hiroshima, the world came within minutes, sometimes seconds, of complete annihilation, and almost no one knows how close it really came.
Deep beneath the ocean, inside a nuclear submarine, alarms screamed. The crew believed war had already begun. Communication with headquarters was lost. Depth charges exploded nearby. The captain ordered preparation for nuclear launch. Only one final step remained. 3 officers had to agree. 2 already had. The 3rd officer sat silently, sweat dripping down his face. He reasoned that if nuclear war had started, official orders would have come through clearly. They hadn't. He refused to authorize the launch. The captain shouted, the crew panicked, the submarine shook, but the missile stayed in its tube. Later, it was confirmed the explosions were not an attack, but training exercises misinterpreted as combat. Again, the world survived by descent.
In another incident, a single faulty chip in a missile control system signaled a launch sequence. Computers insisted the attack was real. Humans were told to trust the machine. One commander chose not to. He demanded visual confirmation. None came. The system reset. The error disappeared. If he had followed protocol, millions would have died because of a defective component smaller than a coin. These stories were buried, not because they were unimportant, but because they were terrifying. Governments feared that admitting how close the world came to destruction would undermine public trust in nuclear deterrence, so reports were classified. Witnesses were silenced. Incidents were labeled false alarms. The public continued believing in control. The truth was far more fragile. The Manhattan Project was created to end a war. Instead, it created a permanent one, a silent war, a psychological war, a war measured in minutes to midnight. The doomsday clock crept closer, not because people wanted destruction, but because systems built for defense demanded constant readiness, and readiness leaves no room for mistakes.
The scientists who built the first bomb believed knowledge could be controlled. History proved otherwise. Once something is possible, it becomes inevitable. The question is no longer whether humanity can destroy itself. That answer is yes. The real question is simpler and far more frightening. Will we always be lucky enough to hesitate? Please subscribe this channel